I was doing a lot of work at the theater. I did box office and, of course, acting, but I also assisted with costumes. And the most awkward part of that is when we did a large cast show, I would have to help with the measurements. Um, that doesn't sound particularly weird, but when you're 16, I think I was still 16 when I started, but there's a measurement that you need to do on men, which is called the inseam, which is basically from the inside crotch to their ankle. And you have to ask the awkward question of which side do you dress? To which side do you dress? Which means what side do you keep your dick on? And it's very awkward. It's very awkward. It's like, to which side do you dress? But of course, this is volunteer theater, and most of these men and young men have never been measured for a costume in their life, so they don't know what that means. So it's like, what side do you put your junk? Because I don't want to be bumping up against it when I put the tape measure up against you. It's like, okay, this is super awkward. Um, so that was a little weird. But I didn't do a lot of sewing. Sometimes I would do hand sewing stuff because I wasn't real proficient with the machines, but like sewing on buttons or details or things like that. So I worked in the set construction. I also helped backstage during shows, so that would be like changing the set over. Sometimes it was costume changes. I remember the most labor intensive was when we did Steel Magnolias, because Steel Magnolias had so many elaborate hairstyles that kept changing. So they would come backstage and we would have to quickly pull the bobby pins out that had like highlighted streaks in, and then we'd have to change a wig or put on a curler wig or something like that. So it was a really dramatic costume changes. So I remember that one. And then we did Into the Woods, and that was funny because I actually had to drive a chicken. There was a remote control RC car, and they put a nest on top of it and a chicken on top of that. And I had to drive this chicken on and around the stage, and it was really difficult because if I were to drive the RC car off the stage into the audience, it would have been a really big problem. And my depth of field and what I was able to see from the wings was a little bit tricky. So one of the things that I did in theater was drive a chicken. But I also did sound. I had a disastrous sound experience when we were doing Driving Miss Daisy. Talk about anxiety. So I'm going to take just a moment to relate this because it is a vivid example of just how bad my anxiety was. Um, we had one of those old reel to reels. Before you had all this digital recording thing, you had tape that would go from one reel to another on this big machine, and then it would play against the playhead, and that's what your sound was recorded on. And it was spliced weird because sometimes you would have to cut things, they would rearrange it, and they hadn't done the final edit because it was the final dress rehearsal night. And there were some things that still needed to be worked out. Our director would always give a wet paint speech at the beginning of the final rehearsal to let the audience know that, everything's not perfect, but, this is our final dress rehearsal. And so the tape wasn't finished cutting, and there was a bad spot in the middle. So one of the things, this old machine, in order to fast forward, you had to stick in this weird piece of wooden wedge that would keep the tape from running against the reader. And because it wasn't spliced correctly, there was this section that I had to fast forward past to get to the next spot for the next cue. So we're in a blackout, and it is, if you've ever seen Driving Miss Daisy, it's the scene where there's been an ice storm and a blackout. So she's lighting candles in the dark, and it's this really quiet, tranquil scene. And what's supposed to be playing, it's supposed to open up with these plink, 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 plink sounds. And meanwhile, I'm trying to get to the plink, plink cue when we're on the complete blackout, and I forgot to stick in that wedge. So I push the fast forward button, and the entire audience hears really fucking loud. And I was mortified. I thought I was going to die of embarrassment and shame. I I just thought I was going to die. I managed to get through the rest of the cues. I wouldn't even look at anybody. The technical director, who is the one who spliced the tape, blamed himself and apologized and stuff. But no, I blamed myself. And I quite literally, I went home that night and I started crying. And I was in hysterics. And I cried for 8 hours. I don't even know how I didn't dehydrate and die. And the next day, I called my doctor, and that's when I was put on antidepressants for the first time. And I remained on antidepressants of one kind or another until last year. But the main problem in that event was anxiety. Super, super high anxiety. And oh my God, that was the worst experience ever.